from HanselMinutes.com. It's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 385, recorded live Thursday, August 8th, 2013. Support for Hansel Minutes is provided by Telerik, offering the best in developer tools and support, online at telerik.com. And by Franklins.net, makers of GesturePad, a powerful gesture recording and recognition system for Microsoft Connect for Windows developers. Details at gesturepak.com. In this episode, Scott talks with Frank Krueger, creator of Calca, a powerful symbol calculator that gives you instant answers as you type.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes, and on the phone I've got Frank Krueger, who just wrote an application called Calca, a symbolic calculator for iPad, and it appears to be blowing up. Congratulations, Frank.
Thank you, Scott. It's been out for just 4 weeks, and it's surpassed my expectations. Thank you.
That's amazing. You got fireballed. Fireballed is when John Gruber, who runs Daring Fireball, likes you, apparently.
Yeah, and I got fireballed while on an airplane. So it was quite fantastic. When I landed, my phone was just full of messages and my friends yelling, laughing at me, all sorts of things. It was quite exciting.
And this is a big deal. I mean, did your site go down? Is fireballed like the modern slash dotting, or did anything tip over or break, or did you just get a bunch of money?
I don't think they're a host of yours, but I use Squarespace, and I've heard that they automatically adapt to that kind of stuff. I don't think the site went down. Definitely posted more traffic than I've ever gotten before. I definitely had the best sales day I've ever had before. It was just a great day.
That's awesome.
So Daring Fireball is especially important to me because I did write this application with the Mac community in mind. And so it's just been really gratifying that they've caught on and seen the app. So I'm quite proud of that fact.
So it is a kind of a reimagining of a calculator. It's a text editor, it's a math environment, it's a solver, it's a spreadsheet. I mean, those are all kind of words for things that we understand to describe something new.
Yeah, and that was the problem I had when I was originally trying to write its description. I was just comparing it against a million other applications because it's just a conglomeration of what were disparate apps into just one thing. So yeah, it started as a text editor because I'm a programmer and I spend my life inside of text editors and I'm very comfortable in there. But I just wanted I wanted a text editor with all the freedom of Sublime Text, but I wanted some of the features of IDEs because our IDEs are really powerful these days. And then I wanted a math engine. Simple as that. I was getting tired of using Google and Wolfram Alpha. And so I thought, well, what would happen if you just combined all these into one app? And Calca is what happened.
I'm not a math person, so I'll just have to plead ignorance right off the bat. But what is Mathematica, and how does it relate to things like that? Because isn't Mathematica the math environment for all?
Yeah, I would say it's the premier math environment for all. It's a fantastic piece of software. I think developed for all of eternity. I think it's ageless at this point. It's what all the professional and academics use when they're doing hard computations. Do you have some large integral that you want to actually get a numerical value, or sorry, not a numerical value, but you actually want to solve an integral, find a closed form solution for it. It handles tremendous amounts of things all around the mathematics community. Sometimes, though, it's a little frustrating to more engineering types like myself because it's very literal. If you ask it to take the derivative of an impulse function, it'll give you some funny answers, things that you don't even learn in engineering school because it's such a smart, intelligent math program. So I wanted some features from it, definitely like the ability to solve algebraic equations, that kind of thing. But I did not need all the other power of Mathematica, and I couldn't afford all the other power of Mathematica.
I love that you couldn't afford to pay for Mathematica, so you wrote your own. I mean, that's pretty awesome.
I mean, we're programmers, right? What else do you do? I can write that. No big deal. How hard could it be?
I have to say, though, I think that you're better at math than maybe you give yourself credit for. I was looking at a discussion of your tool via a blog here, and I believe this is a quote from you where you say, one day it came time for me to write the Jacobian of a system of 6 functions, each involving the quaternion of 6 different variables. And at that point, my brain exploded.
You know, I remember writing that sentence and being like, oh, I must sound like such a jerk. But that was literally what I was doing because, well, let me break it down since you don't know these words, because they're actually very simple words. A quaternion is it's like a complex number, but it's a 3-dimensional complex number. So all the complex numbers we normally deal with are actually 1-dimensional. This is a 3-dimensional complex number, and we use it to represent rotations. And so what I was saying there was I needed a way to represent my orientation, my rotation in a math program. And I used big words for that.
I see.
It's actually real simple. I was working on an augmented reality visualizer kind of thing, and I needed to align the camera, my virtual camera, with the real camera. And to do that, I needed a Jacobian of quaternions.
That's pretty awesome. I guess the limits of my math ability there would be you would want like a vector in 3-dimensional space.
That would be good. The problem with using vectors is that, imagine your normal game camera. So we're playing a video game and we have a camera. So it has a position in space and it has an orientation. So that's 6 degrees of freedom. Now, when you use vectors to represent 3-dimensional information, you generally use 4 vectors. So 12 values. So you have 6 extra degrees of freedom that really cause you troubles when you're trying to do the kind of work I'm doing. So I needed a more refined way to represent 3D information, and quaternions provide that.
I see. So vectors would require me to carry around a bunch of vectors and then consider them all related to each other because I decided that they're related. But a Jacobian matrix is exactly what needed. What's needed for this?
Yeah, it's more like you don't want to over-specify the problem. You don't want to over-engineer the problem. You want to have the unknowns that are really unknown and everything else is known. You carry around this baggage in your head knowing that the direction right is different from the direction up. But the computer doesn't know that. You have to tell it right and up are different, and that's extra information. That's a constraint on the degrees of freedom. Okay.
So coming back down to community college math.
I'm so sorry. That was
No. I think this is awesome. It makes me, when I retire, I'm going to go back to math class. But looking at the website at Calca, calca.io, you use an example that would make more sense, I think, to the average Joe, where you have like a fixed rate mortgage. And it looks like you're writing markdown here.
Yeah. We forgot to throw that into our kitchen sink of what this thing does. So when I was writing Calca, I was obviously doing calculations in it, but I found that I was writing a lot of notes to myself. In programming, we would just leave comments or something. And I thought, well, I'm in a text editor and Markdown's really popular. What would happen if I mixed, text editing annotations with calculations? And there's a little, prior work in this regard. Knuth, Donald Knuth, he invented a style of programming called literate programming. Have you seen that before, Scott? It's really neat where you actually integrate, I'm not going to do it justice, but it's a literate as in description of your program. So you don't have just your code, you have all the annotations. I suggest people go look up literate programming to see what it is.
Right. Well, that's what Knuth thought, that it would be a way to express a program where the logic of the program and English and macros and comments would all be part of a larger program.
Yeah.
So you'd think, and the program would come out of the way you thought.
Yeah,
and it would flow from your
also
thoughts, and like there'd be ordinary human language, and the program would be part of the overall essay.
Yeah, and it was an overall narration. So he would change the order of a program to make the narrative better, the description of the program better. And then his program would, his stuff would compile his documents and rearrange the program so that the compiler would be happy. So he wrote the programs from a human perspective and then wrote a tool to make the compiler happy.
Right. Which is interesting because if we look at your example with the fixed rate mortgage on your homepage, this looks like a Word document, but it also looks like a Word document with an embedded spreadsheet. So then think about the skills that would be required for, my mom or my dad to sit down and ask themselves this question, which is easy to ask the question, but then combine Word and Excel and Lord knows what else into some kind of larger report and then express that. That's a lot of concepts just to go and figure out something like a mortgage, which makes you realize that people just want to sit down and they want to start writing on paper at this point.
And I've definitely had requests for just a much larger standard library because, some people just want to calculate the stupid mortgage or the standard deviation or something like that. They don't want to have to define the standard deviation. And honestly, so that's a constant struggle I'm having of balancing the two, of having something powerful enough where you can define your own operations, but I still provide you enough baked in support. I mean, this even goes back to us talking about the earlier success of the application. I remember going to breakfast with a bunch of friends before its release and being miserable essentially because I had convinced myself that no one was going to like this application because I had realized this fundamental mistake I made with it, where I was asking so much of people. So I'm asking you to define calculations, perform calculations, annotate your document. I'm asking so much that I'd basically given up hope that anyone would tolerate all that kind of work. But it turns out I was kind of wrong, and we are living in a very technically literate society right now. People are very comfortable on the web. We have more programmers than I think we know what to do with. And so I think just in general, the technical literacy of people is going up, and they're able to tolerate more programs like this, especially thanks to Excel.
So let's walk through it. I sit down and I run Calca, and then what?
Well, unfortunately, right now you're given a blank document, just like any good text editor. My favorite example is you type 2 + 2, and then this funny symbol that I would say I invented, but I think you already named it. You call it the Anders symbol.
Or a rocket ship, I think some people call it.
Oh, rocket ship. Yeah, I've heard other descriptions of it too. It's the equal sign followed by the greater sign. I call it therefore. It's therefore in my head. So you type 2 + 2, therefore. And what that operator does is it takes everything to its left and tries to give you the simplest form of it. So in its case, it decided that 2 + 2 is best represented by the number 4. And that's actually how the code works. It's not sitting there and saying, these are two numbers. It's just trying to find a very simple representation. So if I had a bug in there, it might one day decide that 2 + 2 is actually fine. So anyway, that's one line of code or calculation or something. And then maybe on the next line, you can just start creating variables. A = 42. And then, on the next line, you could say, well, y = a + 12. And now you've defined a function, you've defined a variable, you've done some calculations. And you just keep going along, and every so often just dropping in this therefore operator and just seeing what it outputs. And more times than not, you kind of just get a feel for how it works, and you're able to quickly proceed from there and solve real problems.
That's awesome. So I've got my 2 + 2 and all that written out. I just wrote 2 + 2, therefore, and then just 4 appeared, and it has like a background around it, like a gray background, indicating that that's a field that's been calculated.
Yep, that's exactly what it is.
So here's your first public feature request. I click the little sharing button at the bottom, and now I want to print it out.
Yes? You can't?
I see copy, I see message, mail, Twitter, and Facebook.
This is a problem with me using iOS 7. Okay. It'll be there soon, I promise.
So it does work, though? Maybe I'm on iOS 7 too.
Yeah, Okay, well, that's really interesting. iOS has introduced a new feature where back in the day, we all had to write our own sharing features. So if you wanted print, you had to write print. If you wanted to share on Twitter, you had to write that. The operating system now is trying to take care of more of that stuff for us. And so what you do nowadays is you bundle it all up into a bunch of data, give it like MIME types, and hand it to a thing. And that thing is supposed to pick the appropriate ways to output the file. And it looks like it's not. Yeah, so I'll have to definitely take a look at that.
Okay, well, I apologize for calling you out.
Oh, no, that's fun. It's all I've been doing for the last 4 weeks is justifying decisions.
That's awesome. So talk to me about how you wrote it, though. What is this written in?
Yeah, so this is a 100% C# application. I wrote it in Xamarin Studio, the IDE, on the Macintosh, using Xamarin iOS, all targeting iOS. Actually, no, I take that back. I started out on OS X. I started out on the Mac because that's where I actually needed the application. So I started using Xamarin.Mac and wrote out pretty much the entire application as an OS X app, and then ported it over to iOS when I realized that I actually did want to look at some of this stuff while I was being mobile.
So you started on the desktop in C#,
yes,
writing for your Mac.
Yes.
You're a Mac person, you're an iPad person, you're an iPhone person. You didn't have a Windows machine involved at this at any point?
I do have a Windows machine involved now, but in the beginning, no. I use a Windows machine a couple times a month at this point.
Wow. Okay. But you do your stuff in C#. That's interesting.
Yeah. It's a little weird, huh? I guess. Well, the thing is, I'm a Windows programmer by history. My first big programs when I got serious about programming were giant C++ things in MFC. I love the Win32 API. I love the NT kernel. I grew to like WinForms, and that was my world. I loved Windows, but then the iPhone came out, and I found something else that I loved even more, and so I ended up switching to Mac. And so I do have a strong history in Windows, and that's definitely why I was interested in C# when Xamarin came out with it.
So when you wrote this, I know that when you write C# on a Mac or on an iPhone, you write the UI part, what minimal UI you have, although you do have a custom keyboard. You write that UI part using the tools that is native to the application. Yes. So you're writing, what areplists or whatever the Mac thing is that represents a UI. You're not writing it in WPF. You're not writing it in WinForms.
I think it's funny that you think of plist when you think of Mac. I think that's really funny, actually.
Does that make me old? Did I use that wrong?
No, you used it 100% correct. It's just, it's their form of XML.
Yeah.
It's everything can be done in a plist. Why would you need anything else?
Well, that's the funny thing about a Mac. Like, I tease people about Macs, but I've got 2 or 3 in the house here. But I've decided that Macintoshes are basically 3 things. They are plists that make PNGs that are wrapped around shell scripts. So, like, it's this amazing, gorgeous, beautiful thing, but it's all just held together with just transparent PNGs and plists.
Well, there's a lot of PDF files in there too nowadays.
That is true, actually.
They've upgraded, yeah. So I'm sorry, I took us off.
It's okay. Did you make the UI specific? Like, is it like model view controller? And then is there some? Yeah. I'm kind of imagining like Calca.core that's like native and written native.
I called it Calca Lib. It's called Calca Lib, not Calca Core. I've changed my naming scheme. Yeah. You nailed it though. That's exactly what you do. So this is a 100% Cocoa application. Cocoa is the overriding name for the frameworks on Mac. More specifically, it's an app kit. Application kit. That's another library that they have. And specific to that, it's a document-based application kit app. So for Windows programmers out there, it's exactly like MFC. Microsoft Foundation class, yeah. In that, it provides you a lot. Like, it gives you a template for a document-based application. So you can say, file new project in Xcode or Xamarin Studio, and out comes this it's a blank white window, but it's all set for file operations, undo buffers, all that stuff. The application kit gives you just a bucket of tools by default. And so it's really easy to write desktop applications in it, almost just like it was easy to write MFC apps back in the day. So it's a great place to start. Whenever you have a new idea, it's just a great place to start, especially if you have...
Do you think it's actually easier to write apps in C# on a Mac than it is to write them in straight Objective-C?
Oh, yeah.
Do
For
you think
sure.
that'd be interesting to have there be a race?
Oh, racing's terrible. Racing's a bad idea. But there are definite performance can't use that word. Productivity improvements. C# is a productivity language. Simple as that. It was designed to make programmers' lives better. And C was designed to make compilers and operating systems better, not humans. Now, Objective-C has definitely grown. But, as I said with Java, just having a garbage collector solves so many problems. So it's not just the language, it's the .NET runtime, too. So I have a garbage collector, reflection, all these powerful things from a runtime. I have this crazy powerful programming language, which in some ways is a tiny bit long in the tooth, but in other ways is leading the pack in features, like the await keyword recently introduced puts every other language to shame that they don't have a feature that powerful. So there are just some parts of C# that I absolutely adore and would be miserable not having. I mean, from time to time, I do actually do Perl programming on the side. And so it's fun to live in the two universes that are so diametrically opposite. But yeah, started out as a C# app because I love that platform.
So that means then if there's a Calca lib, or a Calca core, then you have a Windows version coming. Like you would have to, because you have to prove that you can write once, run anywhere.
Of course. And deep dark secret, I even know of a financial institution who has a bunch of people using Calca for Windows.
In a month, this happened.
Yeah, and well, honestly, that version took 3 hours. I sat down and, I wrote a WinForms app. You can make fun of me in a moment. A WinForms app, it gives you buttons and dialog boxes, and that's about it. So you have to build up a document architecture. It's not like MSC, it's not like AppKit, so you have to create the file menu, file open, file save, handle collisions, all that stuff. You have to do all that manually. So I would say I spent about 2 hours and 59 minutes working on that, and then 1 minute porting the engine over to Windows, and then it just worked.
Seriously? You just recompiled, fixed one error, and that was it?
Yeah, I used a .NET 4.5 feature in the core of the engine, and I was targeting .NET 3.5, so I just rewrote that one line of code, and that was that. It's funny that the version of .NET I'm using on iOS is farther along than the one I'm going to release on iOS. For iOS, we're using .NET 4.5, but I'm shooting for 3.5 for Windows.
Really? So you're actually shooting for a larger audience. You're going to use an old version of .NET so as to work anywhere.
Yeah, that's it. I want the single executable in a zip file deployment strategy. I just know a lot of people stuck in corporate environments where they really just can't run installers. They can't do this or that. So everything that this application needs to be in that exe or already on the system. So I'm really low targets, zero dependencies, that kind of executable is what I'm shooting for.
So if someone already has .NET 3, 3.5, that it'll just work. What about all those await keywords and things?
That's, so I avoided the await keyword in the core library. So the await keyword it's a miracle for user interface work, but it's not strictly necessary when you're doing library type work. And in some cases, it's not even good to use when you're creating libraries. So it just, fortunately, the way I coded it, it never made its way into the core lib.
And that's actually an interesting point. If one is going to make something that has a UI and a core lib, that they really should be thinking about what the strongest but lowest common denominator could be.
Yeah. Well, this isn't the first app I've ported across platforms, so I kind of had some lessons learned or been burnt by the fire, whatever you want to say. for prior decisions. So I had low expectations and just shot for the low expectations.
Interesting. So if you have an iPhone, iPad, and Mac, and each of those gets you a store, but rather than Windows 8 Store, which would be one less thing to worry about, you're doing an app that will run out of a zip file. How will you sell that? Just PayPal?
Yeah, gosh, it's going to be Stripe, I think. Golly,
Stripe.
That's been the biggest problem, Scott, of releasing apps for Windows is their lack of having a store for desktop apps. Mm-hmm. So the only, in case your listeners don't know, your only options are write a WinRT app and then you can be on the store. If you write a desktop app, well, you can still have your icon on the store, but it redirects to your website. So you have to do all the commerce stuff. And absolutely, I do not want to run a commerce website. And so I've always held off from releasing Windows versions of my apps. But I've just decided that I have to bite the bullet and just do it.
Interesting. So because of corporate America and all the XP machines and different people in finance, you want to support Windows 8, so simply not an option.
Yeah. Windows 8's I won't say Windows 8 is not an option because I would love to port to it. But I have to sound like a business jerk for a minute. The numbers just aren't there. The market's just not there. It's not worth my effort.
Yeah. Interesting. When you have so many versions on so many platforms, how are you testing all of this? Like, what if you found something in the core and then you suddenly had to release iPad, iPhone, iPod, Mac, Windows, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, that's probably the hardest problem. So let's start with how do I test it? Because I think that's kind of interesting for an application like this. This is the first app that I wrote with kind of a test-first mindset. And so this is probably my best tested application. I have many thousands of unit tests that it runs. So that's good. I pretty much detect errors in the engine, the core lib, instantaneously. So that just leaves UI bugs to hash out. So if you're on 3 different platforms, generally that's 3 different UI code bases that you have to maintain, each with its own unique set of problems and features and bug lists and all of that. So that's it's not tricky. It's just a lot of work to maintain those UIs. So you're constantly looking to share more and more code as you possibly can between them. Mm-hmm. And then you asked the question about releasing. Well, that's where I've made big mistakes in the past, where I've allowed different platforms to get out of sync with each other. And this is the frustrating part. It's never because of the core engine or the core library. That guy ports just fine and he's easy to update. It's always the UI. It just decays, falls behind. Like, say I write a very fascinating new visualization on iOS. If I took advantage of a lot of iOS specific features to make that performant or whatever, then I have to backport that to all the other platforms, and it's a lot of work. So coming up with intelligent solutions to those kinds of problems is very high on my priority list. And then, releasing is just about developing a discipline to say that when I release one, I should release all 3. And I'm personally working to develop that discipline.
That really is an issue of discipline, though, isn't it?
Oh, that's all it is. That's all any of this stuff is. It's just, it's so easy for me to release an iOS version and allow the Mac version to decay or something like that. It's so easy. Mm-hmm. And
but are you just one person working on this?
Yeah. One person, design, engineering, product support, marketing, sales. Yep. It's fun.
No pressure.
No worries.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it. Like I said, it's just discipline, and some weeks you're better, other weeks you're worse. You just try to keep your average nice and high.
No, there's another app on Mac. I don't know. I think they just came out on iPhone and iPad called Solver. Solver with a U, S-O-U-L. It looks more like kind of a spreadsheet without a grid.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
But it has the same kind of open-ended, do what you want. How would you describe the difference between Calca and Solver for people who may be familiar already with Solver?
So I'll say straight off the bat that I was a prolific Solver user before I had Calca. In a lot of ways, it was deficiencies in Solver that inspired me to make Calca. So as a comparison, they're both update calculations as you type. So as you change a number, the rest of the sheet or document, whatever you want to call it, gets updated. It's very pretty. It's still prettier than Calca, in my opinion. I got to work on my styling. It's got a lot of built-in stuff, currency conversion, functions, all of that. But in the end, the application it's a lot like running just a Python interpreter, or I guess JavaScript, as if you just brought up Node and just started typing some Node commands. So you type 2 + 2, hit enter, and it gives you the number 4. It's not good at doing, or it doesn't even try to do, symbolic manipulation. That is, it can't handle equations with unknowns. So if I say, well, this y equals m times x plus b, it's not going to do anything until I tell it what m, what x, and what b are. Whereas Calca just, if you don't define them, it just treats them as symbols, and it just carries them on through all the calculations. And so the contrast between Solver and Calca is primarily there, where this is a symbolic calculator, not just a calculator.
Okay. I noticed that right on the home page, you've got this backtick in front of some numbers that is like surrounded. Like it's not a single quote.
That's not my fault. That's John Gruber's. That's
well, what does that mean? Because I can't find that button on my keyboard.
It's up there. It's in the upper left. It's called back quote or tick. I tend to call it tick. Mm-hmm. Where did it come from?
What does it mean, though? I know it says, I'm looking to buy a house
what it actually means
is
you're stuck in a paragraph of text, and you want to call out something as being code or referencing a calculation, something that does something, not just text that sits there. Mm-hmm. And you use the backtick to put you basically in a code environment. It means code. So anyone who's ever written like a LaTeX or tech document knows that you put $ around symbols. This is basically those $signs. You're just delimiting
like
the fact.
In HTML.
It's pre. Yes, that's exactly what it is. It's pre or code.
I'm looking at code. I'm running Calca on my iPhone, mm-hmm. and I don't have that button.
You do. It's hidden. You have to hold. Okay. You have to hold the quote button.
I got it. There it is. I hold down single quote, and then it pops out, and then it gives me 4 other kinds of quotes that I could pick.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked that
It's not
one.
ideal. Yeah, I give a keyboard accessory on iOS, but I still need to even do more improvements for making the keyboard easier to use on iOS.
Well, considering you've added an extra 2 rows of keyboard, there's not much more room. I don't think I would be doing a lot of calculations on a phone. I think that for me, the killer app for this is the iPad. I'm going to show this to my wife, and she's going to freak out. This is going to be awesome.
Right,
she has an MBA and she's into business and finance, and she's going to love this.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, accountants. That's what when I was writing it, I was thinking of programmers and engineers, but I was totally blind. Accountants, obviously, they love this thing.
No, I literally
anyone
just
who loves numbers
sent a copy of this to my finance guy, who still has like an old reverse Polish calculator.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's funny you bring up RPN. Yeah, we got to advance the state of the art, right? RPN is so 1970s.
Well, yeah, so is my accountant, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay.
Well, I tweeted this just now, and people are saying they want the Windows version, so get on that.
Yeah, I'm working on it. So we could go into technology reasons of why that's actually going slow, if you ever care, but. I see we're I've already talked a lot, but
no, this is brilliant. This is great.
I'm fighting Win32 right now.
Yeah, I would love to see in the future, if you haven't already started doing it on your blog, more discussion about kind of how you made it and some of the issues around writing apps for any platform. I think that's a really interesting idea, and some of the things that you've learned about targeting 4 or 5 different things with core, with one core engine is amazing.
Yeah, we're slowly building up this knowledge base of how to go about this correctly. A bunch of guys in Xamarin are starting to get a feel for it. There's a few people like me, John Lipsky, others who have been porting programs around. We are starting to develop decent patterns for this practice. And well, and then there's the blog. Gosh, I didn't know how long it takes to write a blog entry. How do you do it, man? It's
Yeah, it takes a while. It's a problem. But actually, I need to, when I write a lot of blog posts, then I say to myself, it's time for me to write more code. So you oscillate back and forth.
Yeah, I feel like I need a good half day to write a blog post. Or at least a day. I don't know. Yeah. I'm terrible.
That's a lot of code, though. You're not writing if you're writing a blog post.
Yeah. Sometimes you can get the blog post code into your major code base. I've tried that trick a few times.
Well, I really appreciate you chatting with me today, Frank.
Oh, I really appreciate you having me. It's been a long time ambition of mine to get to be on your podcast. So thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely my pleasure. Folks can check out Calca at calca.io. Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.